racist, misogynist, sexist, homophobe. Okay, so these are all insults and accusations that get thrown around a lot. And this sort of comes on top of a lot of the issues I've been talking about in previous videos. But I just want to make this one relatively brief to just touch on the basic dialogue, or lack of dialogue, I should say, in which these sort of things are thrown around. I think a big problem is that for the person on the receiving end, it's very hard to get out of that sort of smear. Now, I am not for a second suggesting that these problems don't exist. Um, they do exist. There are certainly racists out there. There are certainly sexists. There are certainly misogynists. There are certainly homophobes. I'm using those four as examples because they're the ones that are most commonly thrown around, though there are others. Um, those problems exist, but I think it does matter who is throwing them and who is on the receiving end. If you're a white straight male and you get accused of any of those things, it's very difficult to get out of it, because I mentioned earlier about the power of the media. I think even if even if it's a false accusation and there's no basis for it, that sort of thing sticks. And that's why, in my opinion, people need to be very, very careful before they accuse anyone else of these things. And I think some people are way too relaxed in just throwing these terms around. And what's interesting is there is this group of kind of, I don't want to say elite exactly, but there's this group of smug intellectual, it's sort of a smug intellectual class, usually Oxford educated, Harvard educated, who think they have superior knowledge to everyone else. And they are what some on the right would call social justice warriors. I tend to not use that term too much because, firstly, as an insult, it's not really a big insult if you break it down. Social justice warrior. It's almost a compliment. Although it's meant as an insult, it can almost sound like a compliment. Secondly, great figures in history were called social justice warriors in the day. So Martin Luther King was described as a social justice warrior. So I'm not sure if it's the best point of attack. I prefer to say regressive left, because regressive left sums up the mentality these people often have. They think that they're being open minded, they think that they're being great moral crusaders, but in the end of the day, they're just really come across as very smug, very self righteous, and they seem to have this idea that they can slander people, destroy someone's reputation, and yet if the tables turn on them and people ask them tough questions, they play the victim. And that really, 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 in my opinion, makes them extremely unlikable, because it, it's just it's just the epitome of intolerance. Now, I'm not saying that whenever someone accuses someone else of being a sexist or a racist or a homophobe or whatever, that might not be the case. Certainly, there are certain statements. Trump is a very well known example right now, but forget Trump. Let's just use it as a general point of observation. Any public figure who says controversial things is going to get a bit of a backlash, and if you're in public life, you'd need to expect that to some extent. But especially in my opinion, and perhaps some bias because look at me, but I do think that straight white men are in the most difficult position of all, because of the notion that they are mainstream, because they're white, because they're male. There's this absurd notion that all straight white men are privileged. Therefore, it's basically what the regressive left, their attitude is basically, if you're straight white and male, you should shut up. They basically believe that. And Interestingly enough, there's a lot of straight white men who are in the regressive left, but it's sort of like a self-loathing, and they want other people to feel as guilty as they do. I think it's bullshit. I will never, ever, ever apologize for being white, for being male, or for being heterosexual. That doesn't mean I'm proud of those things. Big difference. So, when white supremacists go on about white pride and all that sort of stuff, I've no time for that. But what I detest about the regressive left is they actually think that something that is beyond our control is something to be ashamed of. Now, I'm not homeless. I've got a roof over my head, but I am not living in privilege. I've got serious financial issues at the moment. And I'm only mentioning that not to get sympathy, because I'm not blaming anyone else for it, but simply to point out that this idea that if you're white and male, you're privileged. And it's not that white men are the only people that get accused of these things. I'm not suggesting that. Everyone can potentially be accused of these things, but the implications are much, much greater. Put it this way: if you have a white man who's a public figure, if he gets accused of racism or sexism, that's it. His reputation is tarnished, whether it's deserved or undeserved. If you get a black woman who's accused of those things, she'll more or less get away with it because she might be accused of it, but the media will not make a big issue of that. So, in my opinion, there is profound double standards. If you really, really are against these things, you have to be consistent. You have to be. So, me as a human being, if I see bigotry, if I see prejudice, I will condemn that, regardless of who the subject is. But I detest double standards. I really detest double standards. And it does work me up, I admit, probably more than it should, that people feel they have this moral supremacy over others, but they're not consistent. That is bullshit. If you are anti-racism, you can't say, "Oh, I'm opposed to all racism," but you're a white guy or you're a white woman, so oh, that's valid. It's valid to dislike you because of your skin color. You cannot say I'm against sexism, but hey, anti-male sexism is it's made up by masculists. It's these sort of mentalities are just it just comes down to being a decent human being, and people just having the ability or just trying to see beyond a demographic. And unfortunately, a lot of people, especially on the regressive left, they won't see beyond the demographic because to them, if someone like me disagreed with them, immediately they would portray me as a hard right fascist, which I absolutely am not. But that's the way they operate. They can't actually engage in proper debate, so they resort to name calling. And that's why these smug, um, supposedly educated people think that they're being smart by slandering people as racist and so on, but actually they just look pompous. So what I would say to them is, yes, these problems exist, but certainly not every single time you claim that that is the situation. That theatre thing in East London, West London, I should say. I had a little look at the page that was organising the event, and it was all rambling about racism and how awful it all was and so on. And I put that question to the group, as I put in the last video, about, well, double standards. What about Shakespeare plays that have all Chinese cast members? You have to be consistent. It's as simple as that. And I detest the pompous attitude of the progressive left. Just who the hell do these people think they are? And I think most of them are overprivileged brats. Not all of them, but a good deal of them. Okay, I guess I'm doing the same thing now. I'm name calling, but they have a huge amount of support in the media, and it's not a level playing field. You know, as I make these videos, I'm aware that I sound increasingly populist, and I'm still centrist, but I detest these sort of regressive mentalities. Really do.